Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Rivera. I'm the hearing examiner presiding over today's case. The date is March 14th, 2024, and this is case DCI2022-00044. It is a rezoning request to the Residential Plan Development District, and we have today the applicant with us. They're going to start their presentation, call any witnesses that they may have. After that, we're going to hear from the county staff. They're going to present their review and recommendation in this case. They are recommending approval with conditions and some deviations. After that, we will open up the public comment period. If I have a card here for you, that's when I'll call your name, and you'll come forward and put any comments that you may have onto the record. So with that, I did not administer the oath. If you do intend to speak today, if you could please raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you will provide is the truth?
I do.
Thank you. We can begin with the applicant. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Hearing Examiner. For the record, Veronica Martin, Senior Planner with TDM Consulting. I'm representing the applicant Nova Construction Group, LLC. I have been accepted as an expert witness in the Land Development Code, and I ask to be accepted as such again today.
Yes, thank you.
I do have several exhibits I'd like to enter into the record. A copy of today's PowerPoint presentation and a copy of the expanded justification for deviation number 4 as outlined in the 48-hour letter. I also have a copy of the revised master concept plan that includes condition number 7 per the staff report.
Okay, thank you. So I will accept the PowerPoint as applicant exhibit 1, the deviation justification for applicant exhibit 2, and the revised master concept plan as as applicant exhibit 3. And I do have a copy of your 48-hour letter, which is applicant exhibit A. Just for clarification, has the revised master concept plan been shared with staff?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
I did have one gentleman reach out to me regarding this case, Mr. Keith Benasiak with Beach Walk Isles HOA to the west. He did seem fairly knowledgeable about the rezoning process and had some very smart questions about the buffers, building heights and locations, and impervious surfaces and drainage. So I was able to answer every question that he had. Whether it was to his satisfaction or not, I guess remains to be seen. I was told he wasn't going to be able to make it to the hearing today, though. My presentation today is going to be quite lengthy because I was told that there were going to be people here from the neighborhood, so I'm going to try to answer some of their questions that may come up to ease their minds about some of their concerns.
I don't want to interrupt, but just for ease of reference, I have the master concept plan that I have from the staff report I marked up for working purposes.
Sure.
Since this is a large version, I don't want to splay it out right here. Is the only difference on this version versus what you provided the issue that the staff had raised about the buffer notations?
Ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
This site is located at 11100, 11088, 11070 Kelly Road, plus a landlocked parcel in the center of the site. This property is near the northwest corner of the intersection of Pine Ridge Road and Kelly Road in the Iona-McGregor planning community. And as you can see from the aerial, there's a large man-made lake on a portion of the property that is assumed to be an old borrow pit. The applicant is requesting to rezone the 4.6 acre site from residential multifamily, RM10, to residential planned development, RPD, to permit a maximum of 69 multifamily units not to exceed 45 feet in height. The request includes 46 base density units and 23 bonus density units. Urban services are available to serve the proposed development. This site is accessed from Kelly Road, a county-maintained major collector road, Pine Ridge Road, another county-maintained major collector, is located 370 feet to the east, and San Carlos Boulevard, a state-maintained arterial road, is located 0.07 miles to the west. LCU provided a letter of availability for potable water and sanitary sewer. Fire and EMS is provided by the Iona McGregor Fire Department Station number 74 at 6061 South Point Boulevard. The Lee County Sheriff's Office is located at 14750 6 Mile Cypress Parkway, approximately 5.8 miles away. Public transit is located on San Carlos Boulevard, which is Lee Tran Route 130. Heights Elementary and Harlem Heights Charter Schools are both located nearby. The Harlem Heights Community Park is located 1.4 miles from the site, and the site is serviced by Advanced Disposal for Solid Waste. Excuse me, my clicker's not working. Thank you, Adam.
Go for it again, see if.
Oh, there we go, okay. The property has a future land use classification of central urban as shown in brown. The properties to the north, south, and west all have the same future land use classification of central urban. Those properties east of Pine Ridge Road have a future land use classification of urban community in orange, and those south of Kelly Road and east of Pine Ridge Road have a future land use classification of industrial as shown in pink. The base density permitted in the central urban future land use category is 10 dwelling units per acre. At 4.6 acres of the site, that totals 46 dwelling units. The Land Development Code does permit the applicant to request bonus density at a maximum of 15 dwelling units per acre in this central urban future land use category. That's an additional 23 dwelling units for a total of 69 dwelling units on the property. There are several ways to obtain bonus density. The applicant has opted to utilize the affordable housing option for the additional 23 units and will designate those units to our workforce, including police officers, firemen, nurses, teachers, and such.
So on that point, just to confirm, affordable workforce housing is not low-income housing then? That's a different...
So when the county uses the term affordable, that can be up to 120% of the median income, and that's where our workforce residents' income lies. Land Development Code Section 2-147 sets forth the criteria for planned developments requesting bonus density. A, the additional traffic will not be required to travel through areas with significantly lower densities before reaching the nearest collector or arterial road. Again, the surrounding roadway network consists of major collector and arterial roads. The traffic generated by the 69 dwelling units will not be required to travel through areas with significantly lower densities. Item B, existing and committed public facilities are not so overwhelmed that a density increase would be contrary to the overall public interest. Urban services are available and adequate to serve the 69-unit development. Item C, storm shelters or other appropriate mitigation is provided if the development is located within the coastal high hazard area as defined in Land Development Code Section 2-483. The applicant will be required to follow the appropriate mitigation requirements at the time of local development order permitting. And D, the resulting development will be compatible with existing and planned surrounding land uses. The proposed development, as conditioned, is compatible with the existing and planned uses in the surrounding area, as will be demonstrated throughout this presentation. I made a slide of the surrounding zoning districts for this property. The site is outlined in red. As you can see, the property is currently zoned RM10, which permits multifamily residential uses by right. Surrounding zoning districts include mixed-use planned development to the west, where it's developed with single-family homes at this location. Agricultural zoning is to the north. Commercial and industrial zoning districts to the east, such as CPD, CC, C-1A, CG, IL, IG, and IPD, with the 2 existing duplexes along Kelly Road that are zoned TFC-2. Zoning districts south of Kelly Road include MH1 for mobile homes, CPD, RM2, TFC2, C-1A, C-2, agricultural, and light industrial. Pine Ridge Road does seem to be the dividing line where the industrial zoning districts and uses are separated from the less intensive residential and commercial uses located on the west side of Pine Ridge Road. The applicant proposed a fairly limited schedule of uses typical of small multifamily residential developments and includes accessory uses and structures, administrative offices, multifamily buildings limited to 69 dwelling units, essential service facilities group 1, excavation for water retention, fences and walls, home occupations, a model unit, parking lots, recreational facilities that are private on site, signs, and temporary uses. I'm going to spend quite a bit going over the master concept plan. As previously mentioned, the current zoning district of RM10 already permits the proposed use of multifamily residential. The reason the applicant decided to rezone the property to RPD is due to the existing site conditions, including the unusual lot configuration, the square man-made lake, the 50-foot by 85-foot Lee County DOT drainage easement, and the 50-foot wide IDD canal along Kelly Road to the south. The applicant wanted to take advantage of the lake views while still providing compatibility with a single-family development to the west. The applicant worked with staff to create a master concept plan where the rezoning to RPD is an actual improvement over what could potentially be built with the current RM10 zoning district regulations. The site has one full access driveway off Kelly Road. As you can see, the applicant has intentionally tried to keep the buildings as far from the single-family subdivision to the west as possible. The nearest building is Building 1 in the northwest corner. It's located 20 feet from the west boundary line and is proposed to be 3 stories and a maximum of 35 feet high. Building 2, this one, is located closest to the commercial uses. It's proposed to be 4 stories high and a maximum of 45 feet. Buildings 3 and 4 here in the center are proposed to be 3 stories high and a maximum of 35 feet. The pool, clubhouse, and dumpster are located on the eastern end. The clubhouse is a maximum of 20 feet high. As shown on the MCP, the shoreline here will be reconfigured to be a sinuous shoreline instead of the square shoreline configuration that it currently appears to be. Again, this is a conceptual plan, and the actual shoreline will be firmed up at time of DO permitting with coordination with natural resources and environmental staff. The applicant is providing multiple buffers as part of the development. A 15-foot wide type D buffer will be provided along Kelly Road but it's actually going to be located outside of this 15-foot wide IDD canal easement. The applicant did request a deviation to not provide a buffer against this 50-foot by 85-foot Lee County DOT drainage easement, and staff did recommend approval of that deviation. A 15-foot wide type B buffer is proposed to the east against the TFC2 zoning district. No buffers are proposed, of course, to the lake water body or to the commercial or agricultural zoning districts. And the applicant is requested a deviation to provide a 15-foot wide buffer along the west property line. Excuse me. The buffer will be 15-foot wide with an 8-foot high wall located 10 feet from the property line that will allow the buffer vegetation to be located on the west side, which is the residential side of the property, and will also allow there to be green open space on the multifamily side instead of it being just the wall and then the asphalt parking lot. We wanted to have a little bit of green open space there for smaller plantings and sod and such on that side as well.
It's the community that's to the west. What's the existing buffer that they have on that property line?
I'm not sure they have a buffer.
Okay, so there's no existing wall there from that community that their MPD required. I was in the staff report, but I couldn't marry it between the two.
I honestly don't know. I didn't check that.
Okay, and then the lower, just to go back to a second, to the east buffer, are those duplexes not within 125 feet of that parking area so that you didn't have to provide the 25-foot buffer in that location either? Because the deviation only spoke to the western side.
It's for single-family lots and subdivisions. It doesn't, the language for that section of the code does not cover duplexes, does not include duplexes.
Okay, so that way, so you don't need a deviation. So the type 15 on the east satisfies land development codes. You just need it on the western side, again, because of the 125-foot
Correct.
of the parking areas. Otherwise, you wouldn't need the use against the use buffer, but because of that design that you've chosen, that's why you need it in that location?
That is correct.
Okay. And can you explain the wall again? So the wall's going to go with vegetation on either side?
All of the required buffer vegetation will be located on the west side of the wall, which,
To the existing single-family subdivision to the west?
yes.
Okay.
And I apologize because I didn't write down the buffer vegetation requirements. Adam, I have it. I may have it in my deviation information. Five trees per 100 linear feet in a double staggered hedgerow located between the wall and the abutting property to the west. So that's the buffer vegetation that is required by code to be planted between the 8-foot high wall, and it's a solid opaque wall located 10 feet from the west property line. And then at time of local DO permitting, the landscape plans will provide additional landscaping on the east side of that wall to provide additional green space and smaller vegetation.
For the multi?
For the part, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So they're not looking at just a solid wall. The proposed development will provide 40% open space and provide the minimum number of parking spaces required. A total of 4 deviations have been requested. At this point, I do want to talk about the fact that there is a companion application with this rezoning request, a vacation of easement application. The original application requested to vacate both the 50 by 85 foot wide drainage easement in the southeast corner and the 20-foot wide road easement along the west property line. Lee County DOT denied the request to vacate the drainage easement, so we're keeping that, and we did redesign our master concept plan to incorporate that drainage easement, and went back in and talked to staff about the buffer at that location.
But that drainage easement is different than the IDD, so you do have permission to cross the IDD easement
Yes.
for access? Okay.
Mm-hmm. And it does appear that the 20-foot wide road easement may be a private easement intended to provide access to those landlocked parcels. So we're working with a local attorney to terminate that easement so we can officially withdraw that vacation application. But I just wanted to put that on the record to clarify some of the information. Again, we did request 4 deviations with this application. Deviation 1 requests relief from Land Development Code Section 10285, which requires a minimum connection separation of 245 feet for major collector roads in future urban areas with a posted speed limit of 35 miles per hour. The applicant is requesting to permit a minimum connection separation of 72 feet between the proposed driveway and the existing multifamily driveway to the east. So we actually relocated this driveway. It's closer to this existing multifamily driveway. Currently, the master concept plan, we're relocating it slightly to the west to add more space in configuration for the site plan, since we weren't able to vacate this drainage easement. Staff did recommend approval of this deviation, since we are limited in width of this frontage road, or frontage of the property.
And the justification you provided for that, I believe, also addressed why you can't align with the existing drives to
Yes,
the
ma'am.
south. Thank you.
Yes, we can. We can't align because of the drain.
Got a lot of site constraints.
Yeah. Deviation number 2 seeks relief from Land Development Code Section 10-416 D6, the requirement that if roads, drives, or parking areas associated with a residential subdivision or with a multifamily or non-residential use are located less than 125 feet from an existing single-family residential subdivision or a single-family residential lot, a solid wall or combination berm and solid wall, not less than 8 feet in height, must be constructed not less than 25 feet from the abutting property and landscaped between the wall and the abutting property with a minimum of 5 trees and 18 shrubs per 100 lineal feet or a 30-foot wide type F buffer with the hedge planted a minimum of 20 feet from the abutting property. The applicant, again, is requesting to provide a 15-foot wide buffer with an 8-foot high solid wall or wall and berm combination to be located not less than 10 feet from the abutting property with a minimum of 5 trees per 100 linear feet and a double staggered hedgerow to be located between the wall and the abutting property to the west. The reason the parking lot is located next to the abutting property instead of the multifamily buildings is because as long as I have been doing this, most people prefer the minor inconvenience of a residential parking lot next door, especially if it's hidden by a solid, opaque 8-foot high wall with trees and a hedge over a 3-story building that may intrude and encroach into their space, blocking out the sun, casting a shadow, or encroaching into their privacy by the upper floors being able to see into their backyards. So this site configuration with the deviation protects the abutting property owners and meets the intent of the code to buffer and shield those single-family lots from the parking area.
So just to clarify that, because I didn't see any line of sight exhibits in the staff report, but the way that you've got the site configured, the concerns that you just described are assuaged by this design so that it would not be possible for the upper floor residents of these 3-story buildings to be able to view into the neighborhood?
So in the conditions, I can explain that better.
Okay.
Staff did recommend approval of this deviation, subject to several conditions. And again, there are additional conditions towards, on the next sheet, next couple slides. Prior to the issuance of the first DO, the landscape plans must demonstrate that all shrubs must be installed at 24 inches in height and maintained at 60 inches. Trees must be 10 feet in height, have a 2-inch caliper, and a 4-foot spread at time of installation. And at time of the first DO, the landscape plans must demonstrate 100% native vegetation. Deviation number 3 seeks relief from Land Development Code Section 10-416D3. The requirement that a type D buffer is required when multifamily developments abut a right-of-way. We're requesting to permit no buffer where the 50-foot by 85-foot Lee County DOT drainage easement is located along the Kelly Road right-of-way. And again, this is just a enlarged segment of the master concept plan. Staff did recommend approval of this deviation subject to the following condition. The deviation is only applicable in the area demarcated on the master concept plan. If the drainage easement is subsequently vacated, this deviation is nullified and the code required right-of-way buffer must be provided. Deviation number 4 seeks relief from the Land Development Code Section 10-296E1, Table 6, urban major collector road design, which requires a shared bicycle lane, an 8-foot wide planting strip, and an 8-foot wide pedestrian facility along Kelly Road. The applicant is requesting to permit Kelly Road to remain as currently constructed due to the existing conditions within the Kelly Road right-of-way and then along the property line where the IDD canal is located. Staff recommended that the applicant withdraw this deviation and request the same at the time of DO permitting. I did mention this in the 48-hour letter, and I did speak with staff. We believe that precedent has been set when the same deviation was granted to the property about 170 feet to the east of our property via zoning resolution Z-20-009. We believe that the deviation enhances the achievement of the objectives of the plan development and protects the public health, safety, and welfare, especially when there are guardrails along Kelly Road to protect the traveling public from the steep drainage ditch and riprap along Kelly Road. And also that it would cost the applicant additional time and money to amend the plan development at time of DO permitting for the same deviation. I did submit an enhanced justification for deviation number 4 to staff and also to you at the beginning. So they will be able to review this if we leave the record open.
Just to clarify that, because there was the staff's justification for not supporting it was that you could address it at the time of DO and that would be more appropriate because more detailed plans would be available at that time, and that was a normal course of business for granting these kinds of things. I believe your response to that in the 48-hour letter was you'd have to come back, and I think you just said it again, to amend the master concept plan to do that. So is that something that can be done administratively, or would that have to go through public hearing again?
It can be done administratively,
Okay.
but we don't see the purpose in that, I guess, because nothing will have changed.
Understood.
It's still the same conditions, the same existing roadway conditions.
Thank you. I just need clarification of that.
Sure.
Thank you.
There are 8 conditions of approval with this residential plan development. Condition number 1, the master concept plan must be revised to be consistent with condition number 7. We did make that revision to the master concept plan, which was submitted to the hearing examiner and to staff at the beginning of this presentation. Condition number 2 sets forth the permitted schedule of uses and property development regulations. Condition number 3 requires the development to provide a minimum of 40% or 1.84 acres of open space. Condition number 4 addresses code violation VIO 2022-00044 for removal of trees without a permit. Number 1, prior to issuance of a DO, the applicant must obtain an LDO to plant the abatement trees and must receive a certificate of compliance for the abatement plantings. A total of 27 live oaks and 36 cabbage palms are required. The abatement trees must be planted in areas designated as open space on the master concept plan. And after the issuance of the certificate of completion for the restoration plantings, the developer must submit an annual monitoring report for 5 consecutive years. I did speak with Carol List, the code enforcement officer, and we believe the most appropriate space at this time is the area along the north property line where no buffer is required against the agricultural zoned property. That's also identified as open space. So we can get an LDO for this section that won't cause any issues at time of development order for the remainder of the property. Condition number 5 limits density to 46 standard dwelling units and an additional 23 units through the bonus density program. Condition number 6 sets the maximum height and minimum setback of each building on this site. So this is where the conditions for each building comes into play. Building number 1, again, this is the building closest to the west property line. Building number 1 is limited to a maximum of 35 feet in height and must be set back 20 feet from the west property line. The building must also be oriented so that the short side of the building faces east and west. Building number 1 is also subject to condition number 7. Building number 2, which is the building closest to their commercial uses to the east, is limited to a maximum height of 45 feet and must be set back 200 feet from the west property line. Buildings number 3 and 4 are limited to 35 feet and must be set back 75 feet from the west property line. The clubhouse is limited to a height of 20 feet, and all recreation facilities must be located a minimum of 100 feet from the west property line. Condition number 7 sets forth compatibility enhancements for building number 1. The additional conditions include extending the 8-foot high wall or wall and berm combination continuously to the north boundary line, and it must be set back 15 feet to allow for enhanced plantings. Balconies and exterior stairwells are prohibited on the west building elevation of building number 1. If building number 1 exceeds 28 feet in height, then at time of local development order permitting, the following Type B buffer enhancements must be provided along the north 70 feet of the west boundary line depicted on the master concept plan. 2 additional clusters of 3 native palms and 1 small canopy tree, and all plant material must be 100% native and must be located on the exterior of the 8-foot high wall or wall and berm combination. Condition number 8 requires private on-site recreation facilities. I want to stop at this point before we go on to some of the engineering information. The RM10 zoning district that currently permits multifamily developments, they wouldn't have to go through a rezoning to build and construct multifamily. So they could, in actuality, construct a 3-story, 35-foot tall multifamily building along the west property line. The buffer required between multifamily and single family is only 15 feet without a wall. So, and that is 5 trees per 100 linear feet and 18 shrubs. So we believe that what we have proposed is a huge improvement, even if it is the parking lot against the west property line as opposed to a building. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the engineer of record to discuss traffic, surface water management, and utilities, and then I will be back to go over lead plan compliance and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, I'm Dean Martin with TDM Consulting. I've been accepted as an expert witness before in civil site engineering and would like to be accepted again today.
Yes, thank you.
I want to briefly discuss traffic, drainage, and utilities. On the screen is Table 1. It shows that during the AM peak, we're proposing, it's generating 28 peak trips, and in the PM peak, 35 peak trips. This is per the 11th edition of the ITE trip generation manual using Land Use Code 220. These limited trips will not trip turn lane thresholds on Kelly Road, although that'll be determined during time of DO for turn lanes. Kelly Road directly accesses St. Carlos Boulevard to the west and Pine Ridge Road to the east. Pine Ridge Road is a major collector, while St. Carlos Boulevard is an arterial. St. Carlos Boulevard is state maintained and has an existing level of service of C. Because of the limited traffic generated by the proposed use, the existing level of service will not be adversely affected.
Can you go back for 1 second? I just want to ask a technical question.
Sure.
The Code 220, the Land Use Code 220 is for multifamily low-rise. I think that's for 3 stories or under. You've got that 1 4-story building, and so is that considered a mid-rise? Does that change the traffic generation?
Not very much, no. It may be a couple extra trips. It doesn't make a difference. The reason I had this slide in here, in case you asked that question, it does show, for example, on the left turning in, we have 11 peak trips. It might be, with the mid-rise, it might be 13, but the threshold is 20. We're not really close to the threshold for that.
Even with that, because you've got 15 units, it looks like, of the 4-story, so, but the lion's share of the development was evaluated at the 3-story.
Which is the reason I use the low rise, because the lion's share of the development is the low rise.
And the date on this one that often comes up this was conducted, I think, in July of 2022, but an updated TIS will have to be done before you get your development order, is
Yes,
that
ma'am.
correct? With more detailed information once you have an actual development?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a pending DO on this site? Is that?
We have not submitted yet.
Okay, so there's no pending development order?
Correct.
At this time.
We're working on it, but we haven't got there yet.
But what you've provided, does that meet the county's administrative code and land development code requirements for the TIS for this purpose?
For zonings, yes. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So this is a master concept plan. I wanted to discuss drainage a little bit. Water quality will be provided by proposed interconnected dry detention areas prior to discharge to the existing lake to the east. As shown, stormwater runoff from the proposed impervious areas will be directed to the dry detention areas via sheet flow, catch basins, and culverts. Controlled discharge to the lake will be limited to by a 3-inch circular orifice bleeder at the control elevation. The project will not require a water management permit from South Florida Water Management District because of the project size being less than 10 acres and the impervious surfaces not exceeding 2 acres. However, we will, during the DO process, meet the requirements for South Florida, the ERP, including the flood routings and the stages and so forth. The property in its existing state appears to sheet flow to the existing lake without benefit of any water quality treatment. The property is mostly pervious, with most rainfall likely infiltrating the soil prior to and during sheet flow to the lake. An existing 50-foot wide drainage easement along the southern property line appears to be reserved for the stormwater runoff from Kelly Road. Post-development stormwater discharge from the project will be to the existing lake, mimicking pre-development drainage patterns. There is no noticeable drainage flow from adjacent properties entering the property, and that was determined by site visits and by the survey. The proposed dry detention areas, catch basins, culverts, and control structures will be owned and maintained by the property owner in perpetuity. The property is in a FEMA AE elevation 10 flood zone. The finished floor elevations of the proposed buildings on this project will be elevated to at least 1 foot above the flood elevation. So it'll be at least 11, maybe higher.
So right now, the surface waters are flowing unrestricted into that lake that's there. So after development, you're saying the Water Management District will require you to direct the flow through some kind of drainage construct, but it will be quality tested before it goes in, because you made the point that it's sheet flowing right now without any kind of hindrance.
We have to meet water quality requirements, water quantity requirements, and attenuation. Even though we don't go through South Florida, the county requires that now. Water quality means the first inch of runoff has to be held on site and then discharged via bleeder, so the impurities will filter out with nutrient uptake through the grasses and so forth. That's water quality I was referring to.
And then once it goes into the lake, because you don't own the entirety of the lake, it's a very odd land use pattern you've got right here. So once
Yes.
it goes in there, the Water Management District, I assume, has the permitting information for the surrounding developments to ensure that the water is flowing correctly once it gets there, and it's not just going to, that it's ultimately going someplace else is where I'm getting, because I did my site visit yesterday. It's not clear what's happening. It's very vegetated, I should say that. So it's hard to see the view from where I was on my vantage point on the roadway, but I'm just curious, because it is in a coastal high hazard area, it floods, I would assume. And so then what's happening through this process, how is that going to affect, for better or worse, this project and the surrounding projects?
I'm not sure that that lake has been permitted through Water Management District, but this, pre-development conditions, it perks and it sheet flows into the lake naturally. We're providing a lot less nutrients into the lake, first of all, because we're filtering it out during the process. And it's going through a control structure, so it is limited by the 3-inch bleeder. Our elevations we're adding some fill to the site to bring our finished floors up to meet FEMA requirements, and our parking lots will meet water management and Lee County requirements for the height of those based on our water management system.
I thought there was some mention that there are approved developments that surround the lake that have in some various point of permitting through DO. So are those, they're not being looked at by the Water Management District for those DOs?
Not to my knowledge, ma'am.
You don't have that information for this hearing, I guess, today? Okay.
Correct. I'm sure that'll be asked during the DO process.
Okay. Thank you.
They're very thorough.
I hope that there would be.
For utilities, as Veronica mentioned, Lee County Utilities owns both water and sewer facilities nearby. There is a 6-inch force main that provides sanitary sewer service to the site along Kelly Road, and we'll be proposing a gravity collection system internal to the site, along with a private grinder pump station and a force main extension to tie into the existing 6-inch force main along Kelly Road. Our expected flows are 13,800 gallons a day. We've had a letter from Lee County Utilities that they have capacity in both their water and sewer plants for that additional flow. LCU also owns a 6-inch potable water main along Kelly Road and a 12-inch along Pine Ridge to the east. The 6-inch along Kelly Road is undersized. We'll be required to upsize at least a portion of that water main along Kelly Road to provide adequate pressure and volume of water into the subdivision to provide not only domestic drinking water and shower pressure, but also for fire protection. We're going to be sprinkling the buildings. And that's the extent of my presentation, unless you had any questions.
I asked them as we went through. Thank you.
I wanted to wrap up our team's presentation with compliance with the Lee Plan. Lee Plan Policy 1.1.3 describes the central urban future land use category as the urban core of the county. These areas are already the most heavily settled and have the greatest range and highest level of public services. Residential, commercial, public, and limited light industrial uses continue to dominate in the central urban future land use category. Base density range in this category is from 4 to 10 dwelling units per acre, with a maximum of 15 dwelling units per acre. This area of the Iona McGregor planning community is heavily settled as described as the urban core, and is consistent with Lee Plan Policy 1.1.3. Objective 2.1, development location, and Objective 2.2, development timing, promotes contiguous and compact growth patterns through the rezoning process to contain urban sprawl and to direct new growth where adequate public facilities exist. Kelly Road, again, is a county-maintained major collector road, and urban services are available and adequate to serve the residential development. The property is located in a designated future urban area where public services, shopping, and nearby employment centers are located adjacent to other residential land uses. This is consistent with Objectives 2.1 and 2.2. and policies 2.1.1 and 2.2.1. Lee County Utilities provided a letter of availability confirming there are potable water and sanitary sewer lines in proximity to this site with the capacity to serve the development. This is consistent with Lee Plan standards 4.1.1 water and 4.1.2 sewer. A protected species survey and flux map was provided with the rezoning application. However, no protected species or environmentally sensitive areas were found on site. Again, it should be noted that the applicant did receive a code violation for land clearing and removal of protected trees without a permit. And as a result, the applicant is required to replace those trees at a 3-to-1 ratio, which includes the 27 live oaks and 36 cabbage palms. Goal 5 of the Lee Plan is to accommodate the projected population of Lee County in the year 2045 in appropriate locations, guided by the future land use map, and in attractive and safe neighborhoods with a variety of price ranges and housing types. Lee Plan Policy 5.1.3 directs high-density, multifamily developments to locations that are near employment and shopping centers, are close to parks and schools, and are accessible to mass transit and bicycle facilities. As previously discussed, the proposed development is in a future urban area where these types of facilities already exist. This is consistent with Lee Plan Policy 5.1.3. Lee Plan Policy 5.1.6 requires those high-density multifamily developments to have open space buffering, landscaping, and recreation areas appropriate to their density and design. The master concept plan demonstrates 40% open space, landscape buffers, and a pool and clubhouse. Full landscape plans will be provided at time of DO permitting, and this is consistent with Lee Plan Policy 5.1.6. The proposed multifamily development will provide adequate locations of low and moderate income housing, which is consistent with Lee Plan Policy 5.1.8. And again, the moderate income housing is per the requirements of Lee County's affordable housing definition. Lee Plan Policy 61.3.12 requires shorelines to be sinuous rather than straight. The existing man-made water body appears to be an old borrow pit from many years ago and is relatively square in shape. And as the hearing examiner noticed, the water body is shared by multiple property owners. The applicant will reconfigure the portion of the shoreline that he owns to form the required sinuous shape. Lee Plan Policy 101.3.7 states that bonus density for site-built affordable housing will be considered within the coastal high hazard area. The applicant is requesting a maximum of 15 dwelling units per acre with the utilization of site-built affordable housing. Lee Plan Policy 101.3.2 restricts development in coastal high hazard areas to uplands, except for provisions of public facilities. The flux map provided with this application demonstrated that all development will occur on uplands. And again, that's consistent with Lee Plan Policy 101.3.2. There's multiple levels of criteria for approval as set forth in Land Development Code Section 34-145D4. We believe we have demonstrated that this rezoning request does comply with those criteria, that it complies with the Lee Plan, that it meets the requirements of the Land Development Code and other applicable county regulations or qualifies for deviations, is compatible with existing and planned uses in the surrounding area, will provide access sufficient to support the proposed development intensity, that the expected impacts on transportation facilities will be addressed by existing county regulations and conditions of approval, will not adversely affect environmentally critical or sensitive areas and natural resources, and will be served by urban services. The additional findings for planned developments. We do believe the proposed use mix of uses is appropriate at this proposed location. Again, the current RM10 zoning district currently does permit multifamily uses. the recommended conditions provide sufficient safeguards to the public interest and are reasonably related to the impacts on the public's interest expected from the proposed development, and the requested deviations enhance the achievement of the objectives of the planned development and preserve and promote the general intent of the Land Development Code to protect the health, safety, and welfare. I didn't say this at the beginning, but the applicant is in agreement with the staff report and all the conditions that were set forth in the staff report.
Thank you.
And I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
I didn't have any further at this time. Did staff have any questions of the applicant?
I did not, thank you.
Thank you. Whenever staff is ready.
Pardon me,
Yes, sir.
will there ever be a chance that the audience can address some of this?
Yes, and so perhaps that wasn't
I
clear.
would love the opportunity.
Yes, sir. So perhaps you didn't hear me at the beginning. So the order of proceedings is set forth in our county administrative code. It requires that the applicant goes first and they present their case. Then the county staff follows them and they present their review and recommendation. After that is when we'll open the public comment period and I call the cards that I have here. So if you do want to speak, please make sure you fill out one of the cards. Even if you don't want to speak, please fill that out because you can get a copy of the recommendation and a date of the future board meeting whenever they hear the final version of this case. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Adam. Whenever you're ready.
Hello and good afternoon, Madam Hearing Examiner. For the record, I'm Adam Mendez. I'm a senior planner with the Community Development Zoning Section who'll be presenting some key findings in the staff report. I do have two exhibits I'd like to submit to the record. The first is the proof of publication for this notice of public hearing. The second is staff's PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you. So I will accept the publication notice as Staff Exhibit 2. Staff Exhibit 1 is the staff report, and then Staff Exhibit 3 will be the presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We've heard a lot of the technical requirements of a planned development rezoning. Veronica Martin, the applicant, provided a lot of the background on the Lee Plan and Land Development Code compliance. So the presentation I have before you has a lot less words on the screen. It's got some images, it's got some examples, and I'm going to work through them. These correspond to the staff report key findings, and I've boiled them down to 3 key findings as to why the recommendation is approval with conditions for this request to rezone from residential multifamily, RM10, to residential planned development to allow multifamily dwelling units not to exceed 69 dwelling units. The first key finding is the future land use category. The future land use category is a component of the county's comprehensive plan that designates into the year 2045 the growth horizon where residential, industrial, and commercial development will occur and in what mixes and what proportions. In the central urban future land use category that this property is in, you've heard that the standard density range will allow up to 10 units an acre, which would allow 46 units an acre, or I'm sorry, 46 units on this site without the provision of bonus density. The additional bonus density units are through the affordable housing program, which would allow for an additional 23 units. Those units at that density are within the range of the density that's permitted in the central urban future land use category. So it's consistent with the central urban category in that it's not exceeding the density that is anticipated in this area, provided that the zoning complies with that density threshold that's being sought. I'd like also to note that the convergence of the 3 different future land use categories at this corner is also highlighted in the staff report. The industrial areas along Pine Ridge Road, going from south to north here, they transition from the industrial development future land use category to the urban community, where those industrial and heavy commercial uses still persist as the urban community future land use category does permit industrial uses, as so does the central urban category, which is actually more intensive than the urban community category in terms of the mix of uses in the urban core it's described as. If you look at this as a whole, and you look at the Iona-McGregor area, the central urban area enclave is, I think, I forgot the exact number, but it's a very large area. It's the urban core of the Iona-McGregor future land use category. And there is a mixture of uses in this urban community, urban core area that includes multifamily, single family, and other non-residential uses. The Beach Walk subdivision MPD, which consists of single family neighborhoods and multifamily neighborhoods, and a commercial component, are all within this urban community core. The second finding that's made in the staff report is just acknowledgement of the current conditions. The current conditions are multifamily. That's what the property is zoned. And this is an old map, a zoning map from 1977. This is how zoning was done in 1977. These were 24 by 36 printouts of aerials that were taken periodically of the county. And the zoning staff would actually hand draw in, which I'll show you on the next slide, the delineation between zoning districts. So on this particular aerial, which was dated 1977, the zoning map depicted the subject property, had that same lake in the center. And you can see that the zoning at that time, in roughly 47 years ago, was multifamily for a portion and light industrial over here in the back. Now, just to orient ourselves, this whole square isn't the subject property. They own a portion of it. There's some duplexes approximately right here. There is a vacant to be developed commercial plan development that's here, and then there are some warehouse uses, contractor warehouse space, approximately right here. So in 77, at that time, you can see the properties right here. This was kind of the context at that moment. The context was it was not yet that urban core that it's grown into and that it's realized today. So that multifamily zoning and industrial zoning that we just saw, it transitioned over time. There's a sequence in the staff report. It goes over in chronological order how we got to RM10 today. And RM10 zoning was officially granted across the entire subject property in 2006. The RM10 district is a conventional district. A conventional district is a district that exists in our land development code that is not bound by any site-specific conditions. It's bound by the land development code requirements, which they're generally applicable. They don't really take in the context of what's around. You have minimum setbacks and you have maximum building heights. Those parameters establish where buildings could move or be placed on this property. So I do have an example that I indicate in the staff report. And one of the issues with the RM10 district that I find to be incompatible, or more incompatible than what's being proposed, and I'd like to kind of reframe that, compatible as compared to what is being proposed, is that the existing RM10 district would allow increased height for increased setback. That's a key finding, and that's something that's by right. So the minimum setback from the side lot line, which is the west boundary, is a side lot line, is 20 feet. So if we increase those setbacks by 20 feet, this is a rear setback, and this is a side setback, and this is a water body setback. If we increase each of those setbacks by 20 feet, which is just roughly demonstrated here, we have a rectangular footprint about 25,000 square feet. That's a footprint of a building that, because of the additional setback that's been provided, in addition to what the minimum is, that this building can be up to 75 feet high. 75 feet high, just to kind of visualize that, here you see 6 stories with an architectural feature at the top. That's about 75 feet right there. So in the current zoning district right now, should a developer be ambitious enough to tackle this project, it's possible. It's possible in the zoning district right now. So what is being proposed right now is an RPD. An RPD is, there's a trade-off. There's greater flexibility with development regulations, but they lock you into a very specific plan, and you can't deviate from this plan or change this plan without going through the public hearing process in most cases. So the conditions of approval, and just to explain this, This is the master concept plan roughly superimposed on an aerial, just to give a little bit of scale to the size of the buildings in correlation to the size of the homes, and also the location of the parking lot that's adjacent to the single-family residence to the west. You notice that these buildings are fairly small. This is about 45 feet by 120 feet, this building right here. The house right here, from the front of the garage to the edge of the pool deck, is about 85 feet deep. So the size of these buildings that are closest to, well, at least this building is closest to the single-family residence, is a fairly small residential multifamily building. And you'll notice that it's oriented so the short side of the building is facing the single-family residences. I think what Ms. Martin tried to describe, and what I heard, was in the current zoning district, we could flip-flop. We could put the buildings on the adjacent side, on the other side of this parking lot, in the parking lot adjacent to the lake, and you'd end up with the long side of these buildings much closer to the backyards of these single-family residences. There's no condition in the RM10 zoning that would prohibit that from happening. Additional conditions that staff included in the recommendation before the hearing examiner was the locking in the distance between the west boundary and all of the buildings on this property, so that in the event an administrative amendment was proposed, that these conditions would really lock in the location of these buildings, and there's not a lot of room for them to move without coming back through this process, through the due process for public hearing. This right here from the Kelly Road location to the building here requires a 8-foot high wall. From the point of the building to north, the north boundary line, there is no 8-foot wall required by code. So staff suggests the recommendation that 8-foot wall that's basically shielding the parking lot also continues all the way to the north boundary line. In addition, the wall here will be set back, instead of 10 feet, it will be set back 10 feet from the boundary line to allow a cluster of specific plantings that allow for tiered canopy spread, so that the facade of this building will have a perpetual opacity screening, so that we're not looking directly at the face of the building, we're looking through vegetation. This building right here is also conditioned to prohibit balconies or exterior stairwells on this side to kind of reduce the interference, to reduce the noise associated to that multifamily structure. This master concept plan and the conditions that are recommended before the hearing examiner also lock in the maximum building heights as they are described on the master concept plan. So there won't be any additional setback for additional height under this proposed approval. They will be locked into 3 stories and 4 stories closest to the manufacturing building that's over 200 feet away from this property line. The applicant's 48-hour letter contained one point of interest, and that was that the applicant's request to withdraw deviation 4 and postpone requesting that until at time of DO so that additional details could be provided to determine exactly what the departure was. In reading it briefly, I'm going to ask to leave the record open so we can evaluate the master concept plan that was provided and this expanded justification. But what we're looking for are these visible symptoms of the road that are deficient from what the code currently allows, so that we can have a to and from in terms of what the standard is and what's being proposed. The level of detail that's required for us to reach that in concurrence with Lee County DOT doesn't require core sampling the road for base and subgrade. It's really pavement width, shoulder width, and any of the other features in the table for the the major collector roadway that this portion of Kelly Road is. So I think that with some additional review and concurrence with Lee County DOT, we might be able to come to an agreement on specific language on deviation 4 So we asked to leave the record open, at least for a written submittal at close of hearing if we reach that today after public testimony. In conclusion, I do agree with Ms. Martin's presentation that the request meets the criteria for a planned development rezoning. It's in an urban core. Its design is compatible with the surrounding environs, and the planned development offers the ability not only for myself and staff that helped with this staff report to propose conditions that are reasonable to the impacts, but it also gives us the opportunity to hear the public and hear their concerns and decide whether additional conditions can be included in this plan development to relax those concerns or address those concerns. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. That was very helpful. So the 75-foot building that you showed, that, just to be clear, you kept saying now, but you mean without a public hearing. So that they could come in today with a DO application and build that at the existing density. But there was also a note in the staff report, I think it was on page 5, that there's also an administrative avenue to increase density as well if they meet certain qualifications.
That's right. In conventional zoning districts in Chapter 2 of the Land Development Code, it permits the director the authority to increase, to consider bonus density in conventional zoning districts. Whereas in a planned development, in order for you to obtain bonus density, you have to go through the public hearing process. So it's an administrative review for the same outcome as long as there are key findings that are made, and those are expressed in Chapter 2. So it is possible to, without public hearing, obtain the density that's being sought and also propose buildings higher than what is being locked in today, should this be approved by the board.
And then my only other question, it's rather technical, but the environmental staff report proposed a condition about the littoral areas and the lake bank sloping we keep talking about, but I didn't see the actual condition carried into the schedule of conditions. I don't know if that was implied somewhere and I just missed it.
I don't think you missed it. I honestly don't think that it is carried over there, so I will take a look at that and make sure I address that in the post-hearing written submittal.
Fine. I just wanted to make sure because applicants said they were okay with all of the conditions, and that was in the staff report. It was in the environmental staff report, but it wasn't enumerated in the conditions. So if you could just take a look at that. It's on the bottom of attachment G, which was the environmental staff report. And it sounds like you said it in your presentation, but it wasn't codified in a condition. And as you said, you want the conditions to lock to the master concept plan. So I want to be sure we get that covered. I think everything else I asked as we went through. There was one more question, actually. Page 6 in your staff report, excuse me, talked about the transitional nature of the multifamily use and how that's appropriate between the commercial and the industrial, which is common in what we do here. There was a statement, though, about the two residential duplexes abutting it being subject to baseline ambient density from this, and I just wanted to be sure I understood that statement. So again, that's talking about the transitional nature of this use, and it's kind of a step into the single family. Is that what that?
So for the single family, it was recognizing it's a transition, but we also wanted to try to not ignore the fact that we also have abutting duplexes here, and how is that relationship going to occur, and what do they currently experience right now? And so the way that I tried to frame it was, these duplexes are directly adjacent to this industrial corridor, and by that virtue, they are subject to these baseline intensities that are certainly less compatible than a multifamily neighbor here. It's almost like if you're talking about a home that's in an airport noise zone, they're subject to a baseline noise, and so that has to be considered as far as what's the background conditions. And so that's where that tried to go. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to take a break? Okay. We're going to take a break before we start the public comment. Again, just to go over kind of the rules of how that works under our administrative code is that I will call the cards in the order that I have them. So during the break, if there's certain folks that need to get out of here after they speak, if you could talk to each other and let that be known, or let the staff know to put your card at the top, I will call them in that order. There is only one opportunity to speak, so I would encourage you to take notes again if you haven't already, maybe as you've got your thoughts together while we take this break. There is no time limitation, however, so whatever you have to say, we are happy and welcome to hear it. I would like to make comments of everything and can take it all under consideration. When you get to the board, just be aware that if you do want to speak at the board hearing on this matter, they do have time limitations and they will limit you to the comments that you make today. So again, just be very mindful, please, about the comments you're putting on the record so that that gets carried over. I don't want there to be any confusion about that. And the administrative code as well, the one opportunity to speak, as I said, sometimes folks don't understand exactly. That means everyone gets called once. It also means once we close public comment, it comes back to the applicant and the staff, and then we close the hearing. There is no opportunity for the public to come back up. So what we'll do is we'll make comments, or excuse me, notes of the questions that you ask if you're posing questions. We're not going to answer them during that time though. We're going to come back to the applicant and the staff after and address those. And then if you've got questions about their answers to those questions, that would have to occur outside of the hearing before you get to the board hearing on the final hearing on the matter. So with that, we will take a 10-minute break. It's 2:17 it looks like right now. Well, we'll just go back at 2:30 to make it easy for everyone. So we'll see you back at 2:30.